Hey there. So, with all the hype surrounding the release of Inside Out 2, I thought it was time for me to go and familiarize myself a little more with its predecessor, that first Inside Out from back in 2015. I actually did see Inside Out one time back when it was still new. So, sometime in that 2015 period there, mid to late 2015. Even though back then I certainly did not watch whole lot of movies at that time, especially not animated stuff. But I ended up watching that one just with some friends, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was pleasantly surprised when this kind of lighthearted, silly style animated film, which definitely isn't the kind of thing I tend to have high expectations for. But I was kind of pleasantly surprised when it took this really sensitive, really kind of up close approach to stuff like family life, the painful process of growing up, emotional awareness, and then even some of these little mentioned topics like memory, nostalgia, and that sad feeling that we get for the little things that we know we've forgotten from our childhood, those memories that are gone forever. So I thought it was kind of cool, and it was definitely a pleasant surprise. And then also one little funny little retrospect comment, funny little personal comment. This may be one of the first movies that I remember that made me cry, quote unquote, made me cry. Not necessarily because it's such an emotionally rich movie in an over the top kind of way, but just because that was kind of the part of life when my own emotional personality was gradually beginning to change. And then since I didn't watch a lot of movies, this one just happened to get that to be in that place where I ended up having that little startled moment of, oh, look at that, I'm crying. I must be turning into one of those weird emotional people, you know. But anyway, since that was such a long time ago when I saw it before, I went and got myself a copy a couple weeks ago and watched the movie a couple times just to see what kinds of interesting thoughts and ideas it might trigger for me, and what kind of layers of meaning it might be in there. And I figure it's such a unique movie in a lot of ways that I'll probably be doing a handful of videos on it before I get around to watching the sequel, which I'll probably wait until it comes out on DVD, most likely, for Inside Out 2. So I'm thinking I'll probably make a video where I discuss some of the main points in the movie, such as the really valuable topic of emotional openness and self-awareness, the idea that it's okay to be sad, all that kind of stuff. I'll probably also do another one where I talk about some of the things that I might argue seem to be missing from the psychological world of Inside Out. So basically, this would be my discussion of some of what I see to be some of the limitations, and also kind of thinking about how we can improve our psychological awareness by thinking about some of the things the film doesn't express, because we're into the picture here. So let's take that picture and let's see if we can finesse it just for the fun of it and learn things by that. But before I get to either of those, for this video, I want to just put down some of my thoughts that are literally just from the things that stood out to me from this very last time watching through it. Things that really they're not central to the plot particularly, but they're just topics that have been on my mind. And then specifically, that's going to be the topic of dreaming and sleeping, dream interpretation, epiphanies, and creativity. Man, it seems like a long list when I read it now, but they're all connected, obviously. So I think it's intriguing how these topics emerge within Inside Out and how they're dealt with. And since I got these topics on my mind, and I've been making other videos talking about similar topics, how these relate to other sci-fi and fantasy type stuff, so I thought it'd be fun to talk about. So dreams and sleep. I think dreams are absolutely fascinating. Same thing for sleep. I've heard the observation made that one of the terrifying things about being human is that you have to spend a third of your life unconscious. I think that's kind of a funny, kind of cool little observation there. And as far as doing that, you don't really get much choice in the matter. Certainly, you can cut some corners on that to some degree, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to do it. And you can't keep doing stuff while you're at it. You're like, busy little multitasker trying to take a nap. You can't. You got to literally stop all the things that you're so busy trying to get done. Which makes it kind of cool how they portray sleep in Inside Out. If you remember that part where the characters' joy and sadness, they're on their mission and they're trying to take the train of thought train to get back to headquarters, because they're trying to get the core memories back where they need to be. So they're out there in the great world of Riley's inner self, and they're trying to get back and they're trying to take the train of thought. But then the world transitions into the sleep cycle because, quite appropriately, Riley has gone to sleep, and people have to sleep, people lose sleep, and everything's going to shut down when that happens. If you're inside the inner world, that inner world is It's not going to go life as usual. It's going into a different mode because that's a different mode. So what they do is the lights go down, everything winds down, and the train shuts off. Because just like for us, sleep is that period when we can't just keep on going at the stuff that we want to do or we feel we have to do, which kind of conjures up for me that one real life situation that most of us experience, where that situation where you're laying in bed and it's so difficult to get to sleep because you've got things on your mind that are new and exciting. And that train of thought is just going and going. It's so loaded up with passion and excitement from all this stuff on your mind that it just can't manage to slow down. So the whole system is alive, the whole giant piece. And in order for that system to get into sleep mode, the train of thought's going to have to wind down. And by the same token, flip it around. If the system does go into sleep mode, that means the train of thought will go into sleep mode too, like what we saw in that scene in Inside Out. And as humans, we really ultimately don't have a choice in the matter. We are going to succumb to sleep sooner or later if we're going to function. And studies have shown all kinds of interesting things that happen to people when they go without sleep for extended periods of time, which suggests various biological and psychological roles that the sleep process plays and why we need it. Some of the aspects that stand out in my memory are things like processing and cataloging your memories and experiences from the day, possibly playing out possibilities and imaginations through your dreams, possibly for the sake of emotion management, problem solving, and or processing all the various open boxes in your head, so to speak. So kind of like the boxes open during the day, and then at night, possibly through your dreams and through the sleep process, those open things are kind of just like getting taken care of, getting processed through. So those are just kind of off the top of my head, some of the kinds of things that I think some of the studies point toward. Things like that are probably going on. The best guesses that we can make based on the evidence we have. But anyway, so it's just interesting to think about how all these kinds of aspects play out. But first, I just got to make a playful little extended comment about this little aspect where the train of thoughts actually stops. So the concept of the train of thought stopping while you sleep. So like I said, I think it's a really nice little metaphor just because, in real life, all the organized thinking that we're trying to do throughout the day is just going to have to stop. And that's something we all have to face, when we don't necessarily want to. It's one of those great trade-offs. You're going to get a good night's sleep, but you're going to have to sacrifice all the benefits of, you have to give up your sense of control for every single one of those 8 hours or 6 hours or 9, whatever you're going to get. And if you don't want to make that sacrifice, well, you're just not going to get that. You're just not going to get that sleep, and then eventually you're going to go insane, or whatever happens if you go forever without sleep. You get the idea there. But that said, sometimes I wonder if the train doesn't really stop. Sometimes I wonder if it doesn't really stop. It just slows down and gets a little loopy. Kind of like it goes into safe mode, kicks out the driver, and just keeps on going in these absurd, mindless patterns like a drunken crow. Here's what I mean by that. So I've had the experience more than once in which I'm laying down to try to get sleep, and I've got stuff on my mind of some kind or other. And then as I try to sleep, I try to relax those thoughts, release my grip on them so I can drift off. And then as I do, I literally do begin to drift off, but with the thoughts, not without them. They just kind of start to get less rational. They start to make less sense, and they start to come with images and sounds, kind of like my imagination is becoming experiential. And then if I get awakened by a sound or something before that, before I'm gone, then I can actually remember all of it, or at least bits of it. And so I can remember some of those thoughts and how I didn't notice it at the time, but they were beginning to make less sense, and they were starting to play out visually in front of me. So those experiences have kind of shaped my interpretation of what dreaming is for the last 10 years or so, whenever it was that I first started, had a couple of those. And so I'm not necessarily basing this picture, this, definition of what dreaming is. I'm not necessarily basing it on, studies or anything particularly, but all the things that I've read tend to fit in well with it. I've never read anything that contradicted it. But the way I tend to see dreams, I tend to think of them as an extension of the autonomous process of mind wandering combined with your imagination, except that the imagination has taken over for the five senses, because the five senses are basically, not doing their daytime version of their job. And it's interesting that to go into a similar area, not exactly the same, but similar, it's interesting that studies show that mind wandering is something that we're all of us are doing throughout the day, particularly during periods where we're less focused, like whether you're doing a monotonous task or you've got a little break in between some serious things you're doing. But during periods like that, we're all doing mind wandering throughout the day. But usually we're not aware of it. We're only aware of it if we're interrupted in the middle of it. And then how the studies would find out is they would find out by randomly interrupting people and asking them what they were thinking about. And then theoretically, all of the mind wandering that we're all doing is just a natural way that our brain is processing the things that we are learning and experiencing, as well as a way of planning for possible future contingencies, things like that. So, it's the kind of thing where if we could completely eliminate all mind wandering, which sometimes people kind of have the mindset that they wish they could. But if we actually could eliminate all mind wandering, let's say, you learned how to be in a 24/7 meditative state or something like that, it really probably would be a very, very, very bad thing. Seems like a wandering mind in those appropriate moments when you aren't engaged in high priority mental tasks, it seems like that wandering mind is a normal and a necessary part of being human. And if you think about it, that's not really all that different from certain theories about what dreams are all about. Of course, it's very different, but it's also remarkably similar. And that's where my personal theory comes in about dreams, which once again, I didn't take this from any particular academic, resource, but it tends to be the framework that I come from, and it matches with everything that I've read. So I would suggest that at least one way to think of your dreams at night is that it's kind of like the mind wandering kind of process takes over everything else, while your contact with the external world shuts down, so the five senses go into low power mode, your voluntary muscles go into something like a paralysis. And then with your five senses pretty much out of the picture, your imagination just becomes reality. And then your imagination is in this dance with your wandering mind. So it's just kind of like that train of thought is just painting stuff everywhere. So this is just my long-winded way of me saying, man, I don't know if the train of thought actually stops. I think it just slows down, kicks out the driver, and starts going loopy. It just starts going on auto, making crazy weird turns, all based on seemingly random stimuli, partly in order to map out possible paths, and put down, pathways, and partly just to, keep all those gears on the train working smoothly, kind of like you oil them by running them, that kind of thing. But so that's my little detour there, my little detour. Now on to an actual slight criticism that I have on the movie. So the above, that wasn't a criticism. That was just me giving an alternative way of looking at stuff. But here's this other thing. So if you remember, every time it's time for the sleep cycle, all the characters in headquarters head off to bed. All those emotion characters, they head off to bed and leave one of them in charge. Now, I mean, of course, we recognize the creators probably aren't suggesting that your emotions take a nap when you do. We recognize every allegory has its limits. The filmmakers probably, they just wanted to have the characters go to bed because they're kind of like little humans. They're these little characters. But while we notice that, it's worth kind of reminding ourselves, don't take that too far. We recognize that in real life, emotions, when you're taking a nap, emotions are, if anything, more active in your dreams than they are when you're awake. And when it comes to dream analysis, worthwhile dream analysis, emotions are going to be like 99% of the stuff that's intelligible and the stuff that's profound that you can identify in your dreams. But all that's not my comment I wanted to say. That's another little detour. It's just kind of noticing that they've taken some artistic license, which is totally okay. Every allegory has some stuffing around its edges, and I think that's part of the stuffing around the edges for them. But here's the part that I wanted to comment on. So every time it's time for the sleep cycle, whoever's in charge will say something like, let's get all these memories down to long-term, and they all go sliding away out of headquarters to get transferred to long-term memory. And there they go, all gone, safely stored in long-term because the team has successfully got through one more day. And so there is some interesting truth to that, just the idea that long-term memories definitely require sleep in order to form. If you never slept, you would never have long-term memories. Or at least that's what, something like that is what the evidence seems to point to. But is that really how it happens? Like you just drift asleep and then, oh, there they all go. By the time you start snoring, your memories are zoom, and they are locked away into long term. kind of makes me think of a computer image, like when you run your backup program on your computer and all this stuff just kind of transfers over. And it's kind of this sequential, quick, systematized, computerized thing where all the balls, they just got moved from one place to the other. Now they're in the appropriate location, locked away. But the impression I get more about how actual memories get stored is that it doesn't seem like the impression I get is that it's actually that simple or really like that at all. The impression I get is that most likely transferring memories into long term has some connection with dreaming, or at least these are some of the theories that I've read, and probably has some connection with the emotional association of the memories, and probably has a lot to do as well with just like what you've been thinking about, what you've been paying attention to or recalling throughout the day, which is what makes me wonder if it's not very helpful within this allegorical world for the character to say, let's get these memories down to long term, and then just watch them all rolling off, on their merry way. Because it kind of gives the impression of this really simplistic, quick process that's basically, it's going to be taken care of just the moment you start snoring, as opposed to something that's probably happening all night and something that's highly dependent on certain things that you actually, to some extent, as a person, are kind of in charge of in a limited way, such as how much sleep you get, what quality of sleep you get, what you're thinking about throughout the day, that kind of thing. I think it would make more sense. And so here's me imagining, an improved allegory, which maybe wouldn't look quite so good on screen, but I'm always thinking about stuff like this. It makes me wonder if it would make more sense. And not to suggest they should have made the movie this way, but we just use our imagination to make a little fun little alternate allegory. Maybe it would have made a little more sense for that funny little work crew. How there's always these workers everywhere. They're like janitors and this and that, just running around everywhere inside Riley's, mind. Maybe we could have had the funny little work crew people from downstairs, if they could have come up to headquarters every night and they actually take individual memories and carry them downstairs one at a time based on the prioritization patterns from the thought and emotions from the day. So they've all got some kind of code on them, and the janitor people, they all like, oh, which one? Oh, this one, it's got let's take this one, and then they could have, let's add to that and have that whole process be pulled along in some way by the dream process. So every time, they pick something up, it's in some way reflecting or being shaped by or shaping into, it basically is the dream in some way. One little practical personal observation that I've noted over the years is that I think it's kind of fair to say that things you don't reflect on end up being things you're less likely to remember a couple years down the road. So for myself, periods of life where I didn't have time to reflect or journal or talk about things, in those periods, I end up having large portions of little things that I just don't remember when I think back on them. So I think it's fair to say, I think that the question of whether certain memories actually get into long term, and especially how firmly they get lodged into long term, I think that's got a lot to do with the amount of attention that we give them or they get from us during the daytime. And probably has a lot to do with the amount and the kind of the emotional association, which is one of the many reasons that I think doing positive psychology exercises such as gratitude journaling, gratitude contemplation at the end of the day, that kind of thing, it can be so valuable, not just because you're rewiring your brain for positive awareness and gratitude, which is just an absolutely enormously significant thing, but also because you're also choosing to remember, and you're making it more likely that the things that matter to you most, to the real you, that the part of you that makes choices, the things that matter to you the most, making it more likely that those will actually get stored into long term rather than getting lost in the abyss of forgetfulness, to the extent that the whole emotional and cognitive process results in that particular memory getting coded as significant, which you're kind of in the driver's seat in a limited way if you choose to notice enough to get into that driver's seat and have some influence on that. By way of contrast, I don't know about this idea that let's get all these memories down the line. There they go. The idea that the moment you fall asleep, everything just gets kind of shifted over into long term like a great big computer. Not so sure about that one. I feel like I think you've got a lot more say than that, and there's a lot more room for those balls to actually just not even get where you might like them to go. And particularly if you only sleep for, an hour and you get up. But so now let's transition to another matter entirely. Enough talk about long-term memory and short-term memory and dreams. Now let's shift to the actual dream scene. So it's a kind of fun scene. So maybe I shouldn't act too annoyed by it. It's kind of a fun scene. It's fun to watch, especially when you see bits of it that you recognize from dreams that you've had, or dreams, common dreams, and they make it funny and fun. But it's almost like for me, this last time or the last two times I watched it, um, ever since I saw the balls moving down to long term, like I was just describing, ever since that scene, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way, ever since that, I was kind of waiting to see, okay, when are they going to, you know, give dreaming a more proper depiction? I'm sure they're going to, or at least I was kind of hoping they would, because I didn't remember particularly. But then I came to the actual dream scene where they actually did. And they do give dreaming a bigger depiction, but it's not one that really takes the topic very seriously, which was kind of disappointing for me. And I guess you could definitely say, it's kind of okay since this is just a fun-loving kids movie, but it was a bit of a letdown for me. It seems like in their lighthearted way, in that area, they're kind of portraying dreams as something that has been, and this is maybe almost like a parody. So it's not like I'm trying to take them seriously when they're not trying to be serious, but it is kind of like they're portraying dreams as something that's been put together and structured by the minions to represent your day. So like this thing is something that was made to represent your day. And they're like, okay, let's do it. And it shows her, in the classroom and everything. And yeah, there's a fun aspect to that because we recognize that some of the dream tropes that they show, and they treat them like TV tropes, we recognize, and we can get a nice little laugh out of it when, the fear character who's watching from the command center, and that fear character, he makes this comment about, man, another predictable, boring plot line, and so it's kind of funny. But the fun only lasts as long as your laughter lasts, because fact of the matter is, that's not how things actually go. There's nothing really thought-provoking or telling you about the real world there, because dreams don't represent your day. That's just not how things go. Dreams are not this thing that you get to represent your day. They come from your day in a mechanical, autonomic way based on your emotions and feelings. I mean, maybe an even better way to say it would be, they don't come from your day in the first place. They come from your mind. In your day with all its events, it tends to be the primary source for this, for the predominant collection of all the stuff in your mind that needs to get processed, and so it gets opened up and processed at night. So this idea of dreamland as being a little theater where all the minions get together and they put on a play to represent the day, I kind of found that a little annoying. And then particularly also another reason I found it annoying, within the world of Inside Out, we've got plenty of mechanical gears and pulleys kinds of contraptions that they show here and there, such as the so-called personality islands, which include things like family and honesty, which things, just as a side note here, I feel like some of those would be more appropriately categorized under other categories entirely, such as meaning and purpose and values, things that could have been portrayed with a much larger, more existential kind of scope and significance, rather than just being these mechanical gear and pulley kinds of personality islands. Like it's just, honesty is just a part of your personality, or family is just a part of your personality. I mean, like, certainly you can look at it that way, but anyway, my main point being there are plenty of mechanical contraptions in Mindville here, in Riley's mind. The creators here use plenty of mechanical contraptions. But whereas I don't think it's helpful for us to visualize moral values and sense of meaning and purpose to be just this mechanical little contraption inside your mind, I would argue that dreams should be. They really, really, really need to be seen that way. So what we have is kind of this intriguing kind of switch up from what I would have expected them to portray. So in this switched up version, what we got is that the dreams are portrayed as something that is kind of alive. It's pre-written by these really inventive personalities, like a movie that somebody created. Whereas on the other hand, values and meaning are relegated to being this machine that only operates mechanically. And I would suggest those ought to be flipped. They really ought to be flipped, because dreams are primarily mechanical. They're not things that have been creatively scripted to reflect your day in some kind of expressive way, which is important because that's going to affect how you interpret your dreams. So right out of the gate, I was a bit annoyed. I mean, I'm easy to annoy when it comes to movies, but I was a bit annoyed by the sloppy way they portrayed dreams, not because they have to make every element fit into the allegory, but just because dreams for me are such a fascinating topic. So I kind of like homed in on it, as it were. They make the joking suggestion that when you have seemingly random dreams, they're like that because they were written by really bad screenwriters who are out of ideas, which makes for a good laugh, but then nothing more than that. Now, now things do get a little more interesting, because then joy and sadness, these characters intrude into the dream, which is kind of cool because that's definitely something that happens in actual dreams. Your emotions are, in a sense, intruding all the time. Now, of course, where that breaks down is the fact that, if you didn't have emotions in your dream, you wouldn't even have any dreams of any interesting kind at all. But but it's kind of funny, because when something happens that seems random, like this random dog barking in a dream, the idea is, it's kind of there because of the emotions getting involved. The only problem with that image is that it's implied that that only happens sometimes, whereas in actuality, your dreams probably wouldn't have much of anything of interest in them at all if it wasn't for being shaped by the intrusions of your emotions into the structure of it. And then we get the second set of intrusions into dreams. This time, the intrusion comes from the deep, dark void of the unconscious, or maybe a little better to say, it's the part of the unconscious where deeply repressed memories come from. Because in a sense, the whole dream comes from the unconscious, because it's certainly not conscious. You might be making conscious choices within that dream, but all the scenery around you is coming not from your conscious self. Unless you're having a lucid dream, then you might influence some of the scenery, but you only influence it after it's already been generated by that part of you which is not conscious. But anyway, so they go into that deeply the repressed memories part of the unconscious, which is a fun little idea, since we've all had nightmares that seem to come entirely out of the blue, and which contain elements that seem to make absolutely no sense at all. So I guess the suggestion here is that sometimes the monsters that come at us in our dreams may in some way be a reflection of long repressed fears or memories that get triggered at some point. Maybe they get triggered during the day, or maybe they get triggered by the stream of consciousness while you're sleeping in your dreams. But somehow they get triggered and then they emerge into your dreams. Whether the monster, is something that you actually saw, maybe as a 2-year-old, and then repressed, like that clown, or more likely, I think in a lot of cases, a similar idea is just the idea that it's a generic feeling of fear or terror or whatever that gets triggered and aroused during the process of dreaming, and then it gets expressed and it gets given life in the dream in some way. And the idea is, it's not that much of a difference of an idea. We still have the idea that something has broken out of the deep, dark corners of the repressed unconscious, and then it comes stumbling out into your dream like that clown, making the world shake with every step it takes. So I think that's kind of cool. That picture there is kind of cool. It's just a lot of fun. They find that clown in there, and let's get him out of there. And then that's what the dream is. The dream is somebody let the monster out where he was hiding. So those are some thoughts that I had about dreams based on Inside Out. I think it's an intriguing allegorical universe they created. It really is. It's not perfect, but it's a fun place to imagine, and it's way more thought provoking than a lot of other kids movies in the same genre. Now, the other thing that stood out to me this last time watching Inside Out, once again, unrelated to the main points of the movie, but something else that I thought I'd mention in this video was the way they portray the experience of epiphany. The correlation between the emotion characters and Riley herself, I would argue it's at least from my impression these last 2 times, the correlation is not consistent throughout the movie. So sometimes it seems that the characters in headquarters basically are Riley. So we see anger or fear saying things inside headquarters, and then they show us Riley, and we show on her face that she's thinking exactly the same thing. So these characters basically are So in those moments of the movie, you might say that's when they're really doing more of a strictly proper allegory, in the sense that these characters in the headquarters, they're not primarily characters who are doing things per se. They're symbolic. They represent a young girl, parts of a young girl. But then at other points in the movie, it kind of oscillates into more of a fictional universe kind of way of presenting itself, in which it's more like the characters in headquarters are observers of some kind who have some amount of influence on the girl by means of the keyboard or some other, gadgetry that they have in headquarters. And then it's interesting in those parts where they are portrayed not so much as being her, but as being distinct from her. It's interesting in those parts. It's interesting how they portray the role that these figures are playing in bringing about ideas coming to her mind. And then particularly, I like the way they portrayed that epiphany that she had. But that kind of thing, of like ideas being produced by these little secret people, that kind of thing is just throughout the movie in various ways, various degrees, where it happens. And generally, it seems like the movie kind of leaves it ambiguous as to exactly how it's happening. And that's part of why you can never tell exactly to what extent they're supposed to be her as opposed to being influencing her in some way. But I think it's done in a particularly interesting way. At that one point in the movie, if you remember, when the joy and sadness characters, they're missing because they got sucked into the tube and they had to go off on their journey to try to get the core memories back. But so the remaining three characters in the command center in headquarters are trying to find a way to get Riley into a better situation, because it's like, oh, what are we going to do? And then the anger character, he comes up with an idea and he suggests that they have Riley go back to the town she used to live in, and then we can get new core memories, he said. So what he does is he retrieves this little thingy from the equipment. He opens up the compartment, he pulls it out. Looks kind of like a fancy little weird little fancy little light bulb. And I think it's so evocative and interesting how they portray it, because Anger takes that thing and he screws it into the thing, and then Riley's eyes just light up. And we've all seen that expression. It's one of those basic universal human facial expressions. And a couple moments later, they say in the command center, they're like, "Oh, she took it." They tell us that Riley took it, meaning that, as opposed to the context where these characters are Riley, within this context, it's more like they're influencing her, and she could have took it or not took it. Her eyes lit up, and then she could either go with it or not go with it. The reason I found it so intriguing is just because it's such a universal idea that the creators are tapping into, probably unknowingly. But this very, very universal, or at least very widely talked about idea of the relationship between epiphanies or creativity, that kind of thing. And then people just collectively, have always speculatively imagined these bursts of insight coming from some source or other. And maybe part of the reason that people have made such imaginative speculations for so much of human history, maybe it's just because, as portrayed on the screen there, it's such a visible moment. It just comes out of the person's face. And then maybe the other part is because, from your own point of view, as the person yourself, you very rarely know exactly where it came from. Kind of like, writer's block. And when you get over writer's block, or kind of like the solution to that one grand problem that you thought about for weeks on end, and then suddenly it just comes to you and you're like, whoa, Within the universe of Inside Out, they're kind of, probably without knowing it, they're kind of playing on that ancient imagination by painting a version of reality in which Riley's moments of creativity and inspiration, things popping into her head, are actually being regularly triggered by personalities that she's completely unaware of, by instances of personhood that she's completely unaware of. And we're recognizing, of course, that, like I said, the storytelling style kind of flip-flops between whether these are treated as separate personalities influencing Riley versus just actually being Riley. So, I'm recognizing that. But one of the most memorable, for myself at least, one of the most memorable expressions of this concept in history is the medieval idea of the muse. I remember reading, I think it was in the preface to the Canterbury Tales when I read that for school when I was a teenager. And the author made a passing reference to the muse that spoke or sang these ideas into existence. And I remember reading it and thinking it was really odd. And I was kind of thinking, like, is this guy claiming that his story is like, Bible or something? Like it was given to him by angels? Is this like a sacred text to him? Because I read and I looked up and saw that a muse is the definition of a muse is an angelic being who gives people ideas. So I'm like, is he saying this is like, the new Bible? But pretty quickly I came to realize it's a complete misreading of something that was actually a common imaginative and literary idea spoken about back in the day, which is the idea that every time we exercise creativity, it comes from something outside of us. And that something is the muse, which is a class of angelic beings that are the place where all creativity comes from. And now, even now these days, it's still a term that you might hear now and again, but it's very rarely used as a literal idea that anybody believes in. But now it's completely a symbolic idea. And I think we all just kind of like the idea, or a lot of us at least like the idea, when a really great idea comes to us, this creates this burst of insight or whatever, and we don't know where it came from. We just kind of find something beautiful about the idea that it was kind of like it got whispered into our ear, and then let's be honest, we don't have a clue where it came from. So that's part of why that image as well is something that resonates with a lot of us. But in the Middle Ages, it was something that they actually apparently believed in. And so when they put it in the preface there, he wasn't saying this is, a specially divine book that I'm writing. He's just saying, the process of creativity with the angelic input that is always reflected there. This has resulted in my thing, and I'm really grateful for it. Some other beings that people have speculated throughout history might be the origin of bursts of creativity, or just ideas we have, or insights, or epiphanies. Some other beings that people have speculated might be behind that would be definitely God, definitely demons or devils, imps or capricious spirits, which is a slightly different category, collective human influence through ESP, unprovable bizarre parts of your own unconscious mind. That's where a lot of people think these things come from. Non-corporeal aliens and the gods. Now, for that last one, the gods, I think it's absolutely fascinating what Socrates said, or at least this is what Plato, because Plato wrote the Apology of Socrates, which is from Socrates, but it's in Plato's words. But anyway, this is Plato's version of Socrates' defense from when Socrates was on trial. He was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens, which basically translates into powerful people didn't like him because he was too successful and they wanted to get rid of him. So they said, you're corrupting people with your ideas, But anyway, so one of the things that Socrates, or at least Plato's version of Socrates, said in passing as he's trying to give his final defense, as he told some of his story, is that the way he said it was that in his search for wisdom, he went to all the various kinds of people that he thought would have wisdom. He's looking for wisdom, and he went to all the various kinds, and he was always disappointed, the way he tells the story. And then, so his final conclusion in the end is that, well, I don't claim to have great wisdom as Socrates. I don't have great wisdom. Don't say that about me, but nobody else does. That's for sure. That was kind of the tone of that part of the thing. But in that process, one of the groups of people that he lists, who he went to try to find their wisdom, was the poets. And he says, since he was so disappointed with the philosophers that he thought, well, they didn't have much to say. Well, let's go to the poets, because clearly the poets have great wisdom and insight based on all the remarkable things that they have created. But the more he talked with them, the more he realized that a lot of them didn't understand their own creations as well as he did. And he concluded that the great poets must not be writing based on actual wisdom or understanding, but instead based on a kind of creative process that works all on its own. Here's what it says from an old translation that I found on Internet Archive. The version I was going through was an audiobook, so I can't reference that. But here's an older translation in English. It says, "That showed me in an instant that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners or soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them." End quote. So I thought that was such a fascinating little passage there. And of course, it's in that very rhetorical context because Socrates, or at least Plato's portrayal of Socrates, is really basically saying in really strong language, he's saying that everybody around him who is supposedly smart is actually stupid. So it's very rhetorical, but still it's a fascinating observation that what he's saying is that he describes his journey in a way, and others can relate to that kind of experience a lot of the time in certain limited ways, that the idea that sometimes creative works just seem to create themselves. And then sometimes when you talk to somebody who created a great piece of art in some area of artistry or other, every once in a while, the person doesn't actually have a clue what they actually created. I remember around that same early teenage part of my life, I remember hearing the theory. I don't even know where I heard this, but somebody at least has this theory that all creativity actually comes from God. It's like the monotheistic God. And the way that speculation goes, it's like, well, maybe that's why certain inventions happened one after another, such as all the stuff that led up to the Industrial Revolution and then everything that followed. Or you could take the Star Trek approach, that the computer age, okay, so it's a little later than the Industrial Revolution, but still it's crazy fast technology change. The idea that the computer age was caused when the backwoods hippie named Henry Starling was able to steal technology from a time cop from the future. That's in the really epic Star Trek Voyager episode called Future's End. Because let's be honest, the last 200 years of technological advancement is pretty remarkable. But anyway, so you could take the Star Trek approach, or you could take whoever this guy was who I heard about when I was a teenager, who says, well, hey, maybe creativity is just literally, the way we're creative is because God is like, he's got this God funnel and he gives it to us. No, certainly, I don't imagine a lot of people believe that, but it's just kind of, this whole area is kind of fun to think about just for the fun of it. Now, on a little more serious side, definitely one theme that expresses itself in traditional Christianity and probably a number of other religions, which I'm not as familiar with, but it's the idea that to some extent, evil spirits play a role of some kind in manipulating or influencing the creative process, or even, possibly causing bursts of insight at times. And then one popular idea that gets associated with traditional Christianity is the idea that whenever somebody experiences a quote unquote temptation to do something bad, so whenever you feel an urge to, do something really bad, that comes from the devil. And that's definitely not an idea that comes from the original Christian source material. Whereas the original Christian source material, the Christian scriptures, the New Testament, the teachings of Jesus, stuff like that, really teaches quite explicitly that temptation to do wrong comes primarily from inside us humans. Jesus says the corruption comes from inside the human heart. In the book of James in the New Testament, it says that we are tempted when we're drawn away by our own desires, basically. But that same early Christian source material, the New Testament, also clearly says that evil spirits are consistently having influence on people throughout the world, resulting in ideas and practices that people believe and live out that wouldn't have been there in the same way without this kind of actual non-human influence having some kind of way of playing out in the formation or the structuring of ideas, or maybe even related to just these bursts of insight, possibly. And then here's another take on the idea of epiphanies. So a couple of years ago, I was in the middle of an aisle at Walmart when this middle-aged woman was just walking by in a bit of a hurry. And then she walked by me. And then right when she had got like a couple feet past me, or maybe a couple yards past me, and she turned and looked at me and she said, "You must have a really good aura. I just got the most amazing epiphany the instant I walked by you, or the moment I walked by you," something like that. And she really meant it. And I was like, whoa, she believes something interesting about epiphanies. And I remember thinking at the time, man, I kind of feel like I want to believe what she believes, because that must mean that I have a really good aura. So, that makes me feel good about myself. But anyway, So these are all just a bunch of different aspects. This whole topic, there's so much connected to it. Comes to my mind when I notice those little characters in headquarters that are kind of playing the role of a muse, the role of this mysterious source of epiphanies and creativity within the world of Inside Out. Even though the characters probably weren't thinking about any of this stuff here, but I think in that moment when the anger character screws in that light bulb and Riley's eyes light up, I think the creators are unknowingly tapping into this universal human question about the nature and origin of seemingly untraceable ideas. Now, to tie this in with my discussion about dreams and mind wandering and all that kind of good stuff, I think most modern people will probably agree with me when I suggest that for the most part, we don't really need any special explanation for epiphanies or bursts of insight. So it's been shown that our minds wander much more frequently than we're aware of, because we don't tend to remember that we did so unless we're interrupted in the middle of it. Same as how we dream much more frequently than we tend to remember, because we won't remember the dreams unless we wake up in the middle of it, or or something like that, or unless we write it down early in the morning or something like that. Or talk about it with people or whatever. But if our minds are wandering and we are processing things and drawing connection between memories and ideas and concepts and all that kind of stuff, if we're doing that throughout the day, then it certainly makes sense that occasionally some kind of connection or idea will kind of come together and stand out. And then since the path that got us there, the whole mind wandering journey, since that's not nearly as important as this idea that it created, it makes sense that we'd forget about the path that got us there, because we forget about that path anyway, normally. And then it's going to seem like the idea just came out of nowhere. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that's the only place ideas come from. Sometimes ideas come from literally something external because we're seeing or we're reading something, or maybe it comes from another person who says something to us. So things can come from outside of us, whether it comes through things that people say explicitly, or from things that people want to make you think through the power of suggestion or other manipulative kinds of ways. And then as well, depending on your spiritual orientation, depending where you're at in that whole category, you may or may not be open to the idea that ideas could possibly additionally come from some of those other things that I put on that list of things that people have suggested throughout human history. And I'll just read through that list again. Muses or angelic beings, God, which could be a monotheistic or a pantheistic idea, evil spirits or demons, imps or capricious spirits, collective human influence through ESP, weird layers of the unconscious mind, non-corporeal aliens, or the gods in plural. Or let's add another one on the top of that list. Or heck, maybe it's the multicolored little critters in your head sitting in front of a control panel trying to help you get some new core memories so they don't lose their job. Screw, or in that key important moment, and they just go tick, 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 and you're like, oh, here's what I should do, But anyway, so that's it for this video. I went a bit afield there. I went a bit far out there from the topic of Inside Out, going on all the different aspects of epiphanies and creativity, which qualifies as going quite a bit afield, largely because Inside Out is not about epiphanies or creativity. That's not something they were trying to make part of their main point of their movie. But these are some of the things that pop in my head when I go through a movie like that. And since it was some of the stuff that popped out to me, I thought it'd be fun to talk about. I'm also planning on making at least one more video about Inside Out that'll focus more on some of the actual main points of the movie. Treat it with a little more respect in that way. But so anyway, if you enjoyed this discussion at all, if you want to hear more discussions talking about themes and ideas and side detours that relate to sci-fi and fantasy and stuff like that, then make sure to hit subscribe. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.